So let's talk about the bonus. And the bonus is actually me attempting to demonstrate Combine studies by kind of demonstrating some of these Combine government agency etymologies. What do I mean by that? There's a bunch of agencies. It's a big star nation. It's got government agencies that handle various government affairs, and they've got some interesting names. So, let's get into some of them. So, general notes. Combine agency names have both English and Japanese names. They are not actually translations of each other, and I will show you in a bit why that is. They are not consistently Romanized. So, for those who are not completely aware of Japanese, typically if you're rendering like Japanese into Roman characters, there's different types of romanization. So it's called romaji. And one of the features of Japanese is that you have what's called a long vowel. In this case, it's a vowel that you would hold longer than normal. So if we take an example here, shoji, like shoji panels, that sort of thing. Yeah, my old friend, my old crutch, yeah. And yet we still have to use it when we're doing books like this. So if it were a short vowel, like short held sound, it would be like shoji. But if it's a longer vowel, so in this case with the macron, it's shoji. So many terms which date back to the original House KIRA source book from the 80s use an umlaut to denote a long vowel. And that's not really common, especially in modern books, but it happened because back in the day it was hard to typeset with a macron because like the character wasn't available, so you just use whatever was available. And in the case of the old house book, they used the umlaut, so 2 dots. What happened was that in the current house source book, which dates from 2015, they carried over those names, like the Japanese romanized names, but they didn't change the umlauts. So you have government agency names with these umlauts, but still using... Well, umlauts got turned to vowel plus E, so I guess it's shoji, shuji. Oh, shoji. Yeah. Well, this just shows you that romanization is not consistent across languages. But yeah, but just to say, the current house book, from 2015, uses the standard macron for things. So, for example, this character, this word shoji, is actually from the House KIRA source book. So we have a situation where basically, you have these umlauts plus, standard macrons. So it sort of indicates to me, at least, that either the author or the editorial team did not realize that this was a typesetting thing and not not an intentional thing on the part of the original authors. But for the sake of consistency, for anything that I'm using in Japanese that isn't directly ported from a source book, I'm using macrons. So without further ado, let's talk about some of these agencies. So let's start with the Hyobusho. So the Hyobusho is the Ministry of the Expansion of the Glories of the Draconis Combine. This is also known as the Ministry of War. So, Shuji, yep. So, the etymology of this actually comes from a real name. So, the Hyobusho was the name of the Ministry of War of the Imperial Court under the Ritsuryō system. So, the Ritsuryō system is the classic Imperial Japanese political system and administrative system. So, Emperor had his court, he had a minister of the left, a minister of the right, minister of the center. Those folks have their own, sub-ministers and ministries handling different sorts of work, administration, that sort of thing. So this was the system that kind of existed in the Nara to Heian period, so basically the 8th through 12th centuries before the first Kamakura shogunate was established in the 13th century. 12th century, sorry. So yeah, so the name is proper, at least in Japanese. And I will get to the English names in a little bit, but moving on, so next one, the Minbusho. So this is the Ministry of Well-Being of the Land and the Peoples. so-called Ministry of the Interior. So that's basically from the book itself, where they talk about the Ministry of the Well-Being of the Land and Peoples, and then parentheses Ministry of the Interior. So the Minbusho was another Ritsudio like ministry and it was the Ministry of Popular Affairs. So basically things that concern the common people. Yeah, they sure do like their flowery terms, don't they? And moving on, we have Okurasho. So the Okurasho is the name of the Ministry of the Treasury and the Ritsudio system. And this is in the Draconis Combine, also known as the Ministry of Wealth and the Dispersing of Assets, also the Ministry of the Treasury. And this is where we start doing some interesting things here. So this is the Ministry of Peaceful Order and Honor, aka the Ministry of Justice, and is known as kakun. This is not a Ritsudio agency. Kakun are house precepts. They are actually instructions or exhortations that warrior heads would pass on to their heirs. Basically, it's guidance about how to run the warrior house, or not necessarily the territorial populace, although sometimes that gets put in, but it's not a ministry. It's not like actually, it's like not like some organization. It's actually just a type of written document, but somehow in the original house book and now in the current house book, they decided to call this the Ministry of Justice. Yes, so you've inherited a fief. Yes. So you're a Shugo now. Now what do you do? And speaking of which, why don't we take this time to do a small digression into what exactly a kakun is, like, or at least an example. So the example here is the Gokurakuji letter. So this was written by a Hojo Shigetori. Written by a Hojo, who was the family that basically practically ran the Kamakura shogunate after like the second or third Kamakura shogun. And they basically became the family of regents. So yeah. Just to give you a sense of like what is in these. So to about when does this letter date? So this, I need to double check when this was written. So this particular Hojo was relatively early in the period. So this was written between 1256 to 1261. And yes, this is Hojo Shigetoki. He was never Shiken himself, so Shiken was the regent that functionally ran the Kamakura shogunate in the name of the shogun. But he was very influential, and he passed this on to his own children, who would help run the Hojo clan. And so yeah, it's like a bunch of like precepts or just instructions on how to behave like a lord, how to conduct relations between you and your peers, your subordinates, the shogun, other lords. Basically nothing that has to do with the Ministry of Justice. So just to give you some ideas here. So like precept number 4 in this letter: even in minor matters, you must not disobey a parent's instructions. The purpose of such instructions is always to benefit the children, but children who obey them are few indeed. Close your eyes in concentration and think carefully about this matter. Do not besiege a fortified city. My mistake, that's a different book. Yeah. It's slightly different, but like, yeah, very much the same thing. Yeah, literally meditate on this. Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, like Shigetoki in his last years basically became the head of Gokurakuji, which is a temple. It's a Buddhist temple. So yeah, like, so precept 4 here is about, family relationships and, obedience and stuff like that. Precept 10 here is just, when you pour sake for guests, kneel when you are 3 paces from them, then advance and pour, then go back, still on your knees, and bow to them. Be careful in small rooms or in the presence of women of rank. So you can see, like, the information and things that are given are kind of disparate. And just keep on going. Like, never punish a servant while you are angry. When you have calmed down, call to mind his past record. Compare this with his recent behavior, and if on balance he has shown little loyalty and has now done something serious, punish him. But if you punish him while you are still angry, you will regret it afterward. How to treat your subordinates. Number 52. When you see off someone to whom you owe particular respect, such as your lord or your parent, you should, as long as he is in sight, show reverence by bowing in the direction of his departure as deeply as when you stood before him. While doing this, it is very wrong to cease bowing or to discharge arrows. I think I have to ask a little bit about that last bit. 52 has survived into modern day. It's very visible in hospitality culture. It's true. I'm very happy that people at the business hotel do not shoot arrows at me as I leave. And finally, one of these things that I guess we could say is related to justice. When you are judging a legal case, listen carefully to the defendant's denial as well as to the plaintiff's accusation. It often happens that a person, confronted by another's passionate plea, cannot present his own case coherently. How sad it is when he is condemned, in spite of his innocence and his firm conviction that the charge would be proved false. When a person faces the authorities, he cannot keep a calm mind. Punishment will follow possible conviction, and this will serve to increase the accused man's fears. If you sit in judgment over simple people, you must bear in mind that this is how things are. Then you will be a wise magistrate. So yeah, you can see that, and there are multiple examples of kakun that are available, that this only very tangentially relates to, administering justice in the form of a government agency. And to be honest, I have no idea why, the authors of the original book decided, House Kurita book decided to actually do this. Why they picked kakun as the name. Yeah, some genuinely good advice in there. Yeah, I agree. And I think some folks who are more knowers of the Combine may actually look at some of this and think about a different aspect of the Combine. And I'm going to reserve that for another presentation someday. But I think you might find some of what's going on here to be pretty familiar. So last but not least, I've got one more agency here, and that's the Kasoku, or Ministry of the Servants of the Draconis Combine, or the Ministry of the Court. So just the etymology here, the original house book uses kazoku, and the current book uses kasoku. And I couldn't really find anything on kasoku, but kazoku itself refers to the peerage of the Japanese Empire post-Tokugawa shogunate. And they're basically the former imperial nobility and former daimyo smushed together into a noble peerage group. So they all became barons and marquesses and princes and that sort of thing. And they would also eventually become the upper house of the imperial diet up until the end of the war in 1945. But as you can see, the name Kazoku itself is the nobility. It's not a ministry of the court. And in this case, the ministry of the court in the Draconis Combine is the ministry that actually handles court affairs, on Luthien, the capital, that sort of thing. And the name, the Japanese name doesn't actually match what they're trying to get at. It's kind of sort of related in that both are kind of nobility related. But in the Draconis Combine, they actually use the term kuge, which is noble house, as opposed to the bouquet or warrior house. And yeah, so not sure what's going on here. So yeah, just quickly, these are kind of the sources that I've been using to kind of figure out a lot of these agency names, etymology and stuff in there. So, obviously we have the fastest source books, we got the BattleTech wiki, but also various Japanese history books to kind of verify what I've been seeing off of Wikipedia, because unfortunately once you start kind of learning a bit about a particular subject, the information available in Wikipedia starts becoming less and less reliable, at least to your estimation. So I wanted to make sure I had other sources that I could consult. So yeah, I've got certain questions about and comments about some of this stuff, and it's I don't know why this is. You mentioned you guys mentioned it earlier, but why are the English names so ridiculously grandiose while the Japanese isn't? And so one of the funnier things is that because if we think about what I said before about Japanization, like the Japanization happens pretty late in the creation of the Combine. So it's entirely possible that the English names existed before the Japanese names really did. So one can ask, why are the English names like this and the Japanese names are not actually like a direct translation, or vice versa? My pet theory is that not Japanese, but English names tend to end up like being that kind of like flowery, indirect sort of notion that I think a lot of people tend to associate with Asian cultures for some reason. I will say the grandiose names don't really fit the aesthetic of the Combine, specifically the government anyway. But I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like they are part of the aesthetic of the Combine, but why is the aesthetic that way? You know what I mean? Like if we think about the Combine as we always think of it as space samurai or whatever. But if you actually look at the history of these things, like some of the things that we assume kind of fit that don't actually fit that in real life. So if we're thinking about like, oh, well, the Ministry for the Well-being of the Peoples and whatever, right? It's tend to think of it as like, oh, that's just a kind of indirect way that Asians or Japanese like name things. And it's actually not really true. Like if you look at the Japanese names, they're actually direct. Like they're actually proper direct names of things. Good point. In universe and out of universe ideas. I would be interested in hearing those if you got them. But moving on for the time being, like I wonder what happened in the editorial process that caused them to carry forward the umlauts in these agency names, because like those were not the only things. There's some like various phrases that I decided to not talk about in this because this was just about the agencies. Like, but why carry forward the umlauts? Like it should, if you happen to know a modicum of Japanese and like how like the Japanese language works and how romanization works, I think you would be able to see that like, okay, these guys decided that they were using umlauts for long vowels and that we should change these when we now have like modern desktop publishing applications and we can add a macron to these things. Like, why are we not changing it? Is there this belief that it's like integral to the name itself that they need to like preserve that? And like, did they not realize that? So like, that's just a random question I have about that. And like, finally, like, why are these agency names misleading or wrong, but others are accurate? So what was it about these particular agencies, like the so-called kakun for Ministry of Justice and kazoku for the Ministry of the Court? Like, why are we picking those over like what are honestly like different? Like, why are we using those? Right? It's like, I'm not sure why. Like, especially when you've got 3 other agencies that have proper names. Yeah, also, why are they from different periods of time? Yeah, it's interesting to me that that's not the only example where things from different periods of time are used. I mean, and that's not the end of the world because we are talking about a science fiction setting where, like these guys who are making this polity are looking backwards. And they don't necessarily have the same information that we do in real life in the 21st century. We're talking about like people who are 440 light years away from Earth. We don't know what kind of like stuff they're basing their history on or what their agencies are going to be based on. Like, but yeah, like why are they like different here? There's no real rhyme or reason why one thing is one way and the other is another way, I guess. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of like the questions. Like, I wish I was trying to do some research about why there's this tendency for Anglophone like writing to assume that like Japanese names for things are similar, are like this ridiculously overwrought, grandiose sort of thing when they're actually not. So, yeah, so like those are like the questions I have. I'm wondering if anybody in the chat happens to have any questions that they want to ask. You know, it's I think we've got a few things here that we could probably chew on. Oh, okay. So why are they from? Yeah, so why are they from different periods of time? I don't know. I have to wonder myself. So, if there are no other questions, I think we're done. And thank you so very much for attending. Like, I appreciate folks taking the time to watch this little thing. I do wish had a little bit more, but I think I'm going to try to work a little more on different aspects of this. I think it's a pretty broad subject. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too.